As we all know, Boko Haram has significantly accelerated its acts of mass murder and abduction in Nigeria, requiring a more robust and effective response from the government of Nigeria and friends like the United States. According to the most recent report by the Internal Displaced Monitoring Center and the Norwegian Refugee Council, there are now some 3.1 million Nigerian internally displaced persons, or IDPs, more than every other country in the world except for Syria and Colombia. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that there are now more than 10,000 Nigerian refugees in Niger and Cameroon. According to the International Rescue Committee, due to credible fears of abduction, as many as 1,000 refugees a week, 80% women and girls, are fleeing to the nearby country of Niger from Nigeria's Borno State alone. Former U.S. Ambassador to Nigeria, Robin Renee Sanders, testified before this subcommittee on June 11th that the fight against Boko Haram will be a long war, as she put it, but that the Nigerian military and security forces are insufficiently trained and ill-equipped to meet the challenge of a savage, relentless violence unleashed by Boko Haram. Just this morning, she told a Capitol Hill forum on Boko Haram that in the vacuum created by delays in training Nigerian forces, vigilante groups have now been formed. They've been there, but now they're growing in number, and are themselves committing human rights abuses. According to the current State Department Human Rights Report, Boko Haram is responsible for the most heinous human rights violations in Nigeria, but that same report tells us that elements of the Nigerian armed forces and security apparatus have committed serious human rights abuses as well, with little or no accountability. Even in the face of serious threats to Nigerian and regional security, the U.S. government, which has a long-standing alliance with the Federal Republic of Nigeria, has experienced some obstacles in providing the security assistance necessary to help our ally address this dire emergency. Laws our Congress created to prevent our alliance with rogue military and security forces are being blamed by some for making our assistance more difficult to provide. But is it the law? Is the law the problem? Or rather, is it how the law is being applied? Or is it that the U.S. has not attempted to train sufficient numbers of human rights vetted Nigerian forces? Or is it the Nigerians themselves not wanting that kind of training? What is the targeted number for trained Nigerians? For this year and the future, how many trainers have been committed to this task? I believe the Leahy laws are a necessary component of a prudent human rights policy, and today's hearing is in large part intended to find out whether there are legitimate obstacles to their implementation. At the outset, I would like to make clear that I have long supported human rights vetting to allow for training of those who pass muster. One example of many, as chair of the then Subcommittee on International Operations and Human Rights, I chaired a hearing on Indonesia on May 7, 1998, featuring a man by the name of Pius Lustri Lanang, who was tortured by members of the Indonesian military amid deep concerns that those involved may have been trained under our Military Education and Training Program, or IMET. In like manner, I and others were concerned that U.S.-trained Indonesian troops may have been complicit in slaughtering people in East Timor. On a fact-finding trip to Jakarta, I sought but never received the names of specific individuals trained by the U.S., including members of the elite Kopassus unit, who slaughtered dissidents as the Suharto government fell. Similar training concerns were expressed by me and others concerning the Joint Combined Exchange Training, or JCET, and the Rwandan Patriotic Army during the period when the RPA was engaged in the killing of refugees in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Moreover, in 1999, Congress passed my legislation, and Mrs. Masmino will remember this well because she testified at several of those hearings that we had, that suspended all U.S. federal law enforcement support and exchanges with the British police force in Northern Ireland, known as the Royal Ulster Constabulary, until new human rights training programs were implemented there, and until programs were established to vet out any RUC officers who engaged in human rights abuses from benefiting from American training and preparation. The vetting legislation worked. Exchanges and training at FBI facilities for RUC officers were suspended for more than 2 years, until President Bush certified that the British had established a system to vet and block anyone who committed or condoned human rights violations from the program. As my colleagues know, according to the current Quadrennial Defense Review, we are in a time of increased danger from terrorist forces in foreign nations, while shrinking budgets force our military and security forces to become smaller and leaner. The QDR states, and I quote in pertinent part, the Department of Defense will rebalance our counterterrorism efforts towards greater emphasis on building partnership capacity, especially in fragile states. One manifestation of that developing policy is the President's proposal to allocate $5 billion to a new counterterrorism partnership fund. I have visited Nigeria twice in the past 9 months alone and have chaired several hearings on security in Nigeria in the past 2 Congresses alone. Just last month, I met with U.S. and Nigerian officials to find out why our security assistance has been so difficult to provide when the need is so increasingly great. Is it the process, or has the administration not sought to seriously expand training? I don't know. You will notice that the Department of State is not testifying today. That is partly because Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Tom Malinowski, was unavailable when we invited him to testify. And I know he will come at a future date, and hopefully very soon. But it may also be partly due to an abundance of caution surrounding even a discussion of difficulties experienced in implementing the Leahy laws. For example, when I was in Abuja last month, I asked our embassy to provide me with their best recommendations, and I would share it with everyone here, for making the Leahy vetting more effective so that we can provide the much-needed aid to the Nigerian government and then end the increasing slaughter and kidnapping of innocents such as the Chibok school girls. Despite initial assurances of cooperation, I have yet to receive the information, but I will keep asking. I understand that not everything that can be said publicly or should be said publicly, but again, this law was created with full transparency, passed the Senate at the behest of Senator Leahy, and has been renewed year in and year out, often with tweaks and changes to it. As my colleagues know, we refer to the Leahy laws because there are actually 2 of them, one for the Department of State and one for the Department of Defense. Together, they cover material assistance, including equipment and training. These laws require investigation of alleged human rights violations by military and security forces, including police. These investigations, performed mostly by the Department of State, require details on not only individuals but also military units. Failure to obtain such information as name and date and place of birth can sometimes prevent an investigation and put it into limbo. National government officials may consider such information an invasion of their sovereignty, although we ought to do more to convince them why that is not so, to avoid aiding and abetting rogue elements. We must know if a perpetrator of abuse is a man from Jos or a man with the same name from Kano State, as one example. If individuals or elements of a larger force are guilty of human rights violations, entire battalions or regiments can be tainted unless the guilty are identified and separated out from those forces that are innocent of such crimes. The Leahy laws allow for the recreation of clean units. On the surface, it would seem that such a policy is clear and possible to implement. Unfortunately, it has not been so simple in practice. Despite the fact that Sarah Sewell, Undersecretary of State for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights, told the full Foreign Affairs Committee on May 21st in this room that at least half of the Nigerian military and security forces are clear of allegations of human rights violations, we continue to be told that Leahy vetting is at least slowing the provision of security assistance. According to congressional testimony by Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Robert Jackson, there are an estimated 187 Nigerian military units and 173 police units that have been cleared, but very few Nigerian units have been trained or are in training today. Again, the big question, why? Our government provides approximately $15 billion in security assistance worldwide each year, involving 158 countries. Yet there are only 13 headquarters staff handling Leahy vetting, in addition to embassy personnel. Is this a sign that these laws are not being taken seriously enough by our own government, and is there a requirement for additional spending? In the current fiscal year, the Department of State is receiving $2.75 million to conduct Leahy vetting. In the newest bill, the Senate has $5 million. Perhaps that will be enough. I don't know. I would hope our distinguished witnesses will shed some light on that. Of the 158 countries we provided assistance to, 46 had some aid withheld in 2011. The typical percentage of global Leahy vettings that don't meet requirements is about 1 to 2%, with just under 10%, quote, suspended. In fiscal year 2012, according to testimony from the congressional research expert, Laura Plow, the State Department vetting 1,377 members of the Nigerian security forces, and of that figure, 85% were cleared to receive assistance, with 15% rejected or suspended. In Colombia, the government rejected the requirements of the Leahy laws before changing their minds and accepting the process. Now, there reportedly are more high-ranking Colombian military officials and officers behind bars than in any other country other than Argentina, and Colombia is cited as a Leahy law success. In Nigeria, there has been no disciplinary actions against Nigerian military for scorched earth assaults on populations, and few high-ranking Nigerian military officers have been held accountable for human rights violations. So we're here today to examine the questions that these facts raise and other facts, and our witnesses have been asked to walk us through the process, tell us what works and what doesn't, and suggest ways to make this process more effective.